What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be going through some of the changes from the latest balanced data slate. This included huge transformative rules changes, both to the core rules of the game, army abilities, data sheets, as well as a revision of points values across the entire game. And what we're going to be talking about are the factions that received the biggest improvements from these changes. I'm going to be talking about these in ascending order, and starting with some factions that I think largely got a side grade, getting both buffs and nerfs. This includes Chaos Knights, which received huge points drops on their large knights, but lost a lot of points in their most popular list archetype, that being a War Dog spam style of list. These lists included tons and tons of War Dogs, and especially War Dog Brigands. However, Brigands specifically got a points increase. Chaos Knights are also probably disproportionately affected by changes to Chaos Demons and Demonic Pacts. You now no longer can take Chaos Demon non-battle line units without taking battle line units of the same allegiance, meaning that some of the lone operative characters that Chaos Knights and Chaos Space Marines used to take advantage of, things like the Blue Scribes, Changeling, and Celeste, are much harder to include. On top of that, Nurglings got a points increase as well, which makes Chaos Knight lists harder to assemble. That said, most of the big Chaos Knights got enormous points decreases, which is why this is largely a side grade, and I think Chaos Knight lists may be moving towards taking one or two of those big guys in addition to continuously spamming the War Dogs. Next up, we have Space Wolves. Now, Space Wolves unfortunately did get hit by the downgrades to Space Marines. We saw points increases to a lot of units in Space Marines like Aggressors and Inceptors that were extremely popular, probably a little bit too popular, as well as some units that I don't know if necessarily deserved it. Whirlwinds went up a lot for some reason, not really sure why that is. But the Space Wolf specific detachment Champions of Rust got much better, now selecting its sagas to perform every turn instead of weirdly at the end of each battle round. That means that sagas are much easier to complete and will complete more consistently, so you're gonna be able to actually make use of your detachment ability, whereas previously you kind of didn't. In addition to that, we also got stat improvements to several Space Wolf units, including some updates and typo fixing and melee improvements to some of their characters. On top of that, Wolfen are probably back in the realm of playability with an improvement to their hammer profile, which makes them actually pretty efficient melee units, and some of the points decreases to basic infantry did help out some Space Wolf specific builds that were focusing on units like Assault Intercessors. So ultimately, they win some and they lost some. Now, I'm also going to throw a shout out in here to Agents of the Imperium. Previously, Agents of the Imperium was just a faction of allies that would ally into Imperium lists. They did get a clause that allows them to be played as a unique faction because they give you the ability to ignore your select detachment step. However, the ability is broken right now and doesn't do anything. I think the intention is that you're supposed to be able to play Agents of the Imperium as a separate faction, which would probably make them the most improved faction in the game, going from not being able to be played to now being able to be played, basically like a 0 to 100 increase in power level. However, right now it doesn't do anything. I have a video on my second channel explaining why it's borked, but it's a stupid thing because they wrote the words wrong. And with that, let's talk about some factions that actually improved, starting with Grey Knights. Grey Knights did get a point increase on one of their units, which makes it seem like the faction got nerfed overall. Brotherhood Librarians went up 10 points per model. You usually only saw 2 or 3 in a list, which means that the points increase was not extreme. They're not increasing the points value of their like basic battle line infantry or anything, but it is a nerf, which is why they're at the bottom of this list. That said, Grey Knights got a ton of datasheet updates. Caldor Drago can now use his ability to charge closer out of teleport assault, meaning that his unit can start on the table, return into reserve thanks to teleport assault, and potentially on the bottom of the first round, come back in and then charge. Caldor Drago's Terminator unit is an incredible tempo piece. It's able to go in. If he's in a Brotherhood Terminator squad, he's getting lethal hits on the charge. They're able to do a pretty respectable amount of damage, flip objectives, pin your opponent in their deployment zone, and then if they move anything nearby you, you can Mists of Deimos out of there and then rapid ingress back in later on in the same turn to allow him to potentially get another charge in the subsequent turn again. His unit is a nightmare to deal with, and being able to use his ability more consistently consistently is incredibly powerful. On top of that, Nemesis Dread Knights got a huge statistical improvement with a weapon skill improvement on all of their melee weapons, as well as a big increase on their armor penetration on their heavy psi cannon. Previously, heavy psi cannons were AP 1, which means that they basically just bounced off of cover and most enemies were saving against them on 2s or 3s, which really limited the amount of damage that they would do to most targets. But now they are AP 2 base and ignore cover, making them usually the equivalent of somewhere around AP 3, which is an actual relatively dangerous profile to medium infantry or vehicles. That makes Nemesis Dread Knights much better at actually clearing out enemies, and I think taking a couple of them to act as a little bit of anti-tank shooting alongside the Brotherhood Librarians that Grey Knights are probably already taking can actually improve the faction's ability to deal damage. Moving on from that, we have Imperial Knights. Now, Imperial Knights were in a pretty bad spot moving into this data slate, but they did get some huge points decreases, with most of their heavy knights being reduced in points value. Given that Imperial Knights are usually focused more on the bigger, heavier Titanic units over the lighter knights, the Armature class knights that Chaos Knights are usually taking, the points cut on these Titanic units is much more effective for Imperial Knights than I think it is for Chaos Knights. On top of that, Imperial Knights also got an update to their Lay Low the Tyrant ability, giving them floating hit and wound rerolls of any result, not simply the result of a 1, making their attacks way more consistent. Overall, I don't know if it's going to transform Imperial Knights wholesale, but it is a huge quality of life improvement, giving you better dice over the course of the game and more units with which to use those dice thanks to your units being cheaper. Now, moving on from that, we'll talk about Adeptus Custodes. These guys saw some relatively minor changes, but as a faction that was on the cusp of doing kind of okay, I guess, Adeptus Custodes were definitely in a position to utilize any bust that they received in a big way. First of all, they got some points breaks across the board, most of their infantry being reduced in cost, as well as getting some pretty spicy breaks on mounted units like Virtus Praetors and Dawn Eagle Jetbike mounted shield captains. Well, I don't know if it's going to land Virtus Praetors back into the realm of playability. I do think that those Dawn Eagle Jetbike shield captains look a lot spicier at a more reasonable points value. Those guys individually are fast, maneuverable, relatively efficient, and good at clearing out medium infantry and stealing objectives from them, and with the ability to fight and then run away once per game, they're actually difficult to get to grips with as well. I think this might open up a little bit more technology for various Custodes lists to use, and they're going to have more points to use them, given that all the infantry they're already taking is going to be cheaper. On top of that, their detachment ability got massively buffed, now giving a 4+ feel no pain against devastating damage as well as mortal wounds, which was probably the easiest way to get rid of Custodes previously. For a faction that's entirely reliant on having ridiculous armor saves and good invulnerable saving throws, the ability of devastating damage to automatically bypass all of those saves meant that it ripped apart expensive custodian wounds. Now that you have more of those wounds on the table and they're getting a save against that damage, these guys are going to be looking a lot better in the matchups where devastating damage is relevant. And that moves us on to, I think, the second most improved faction in the game. Chaos Daemons purely got points back. They got massive points cuts almost across the board. We did see a couple points hikes on units that were taken largely as allies, but most of the demon combat units have been reduced. This includes their battle line infantry going down, as well as most of their big monsters going down across the board. I think this opens up a lot more play space for demons, which are going to get a couple hundred points more to play with, and definitely helps to alleviate the fact that demons tend to be kind of mediocre in damage output and easy to kill. They're highly maneuverable and good at scoring, but because their units were relatively elite, they weren't really able to take advantage of that. But I think now, with a lot more points in their list, they potentially are, and we could see demons actually doing some cool stuff over the next couple of months. Demons did receive a nerf to their Demonic Pact ability, which makes it harder to ally with them, as I mentioned before in the Chaos Knight section. But given the fact that that's an ability that only buffs other Chaos factions and doesn't actually do anything for demons, it actually kind of tangentially makes demons better because they're going to have to deal with less of themselves in other factions. And with that, we'll move on to the most improved faction for the January 2024 data slate, this being Drukhari. These guys, in addition to getting huge points breaks basically across the board, a lot of their faster utility units like Reaver Jetbikes and Hellions have been reduced, and their close combat-based units like Incubi also saw some points breaks as well. On top of that, we saw lighter transports like Venom see some points breaks, and all of this is in service to their new detachment, the Sky Splinter Assault. This detachment meshes extremely well with the Drukhari focus on transports, and given that Drukhari had basically no detachment abilities or usable stratagems from their previous index detachment, is almost entirely just buffs for the army. Drukhari's army ability, their pain token mechanic, is very strong and got an additional buff with a rework in this update as well, and they're still going to be able to use that to basically the same effectiveness, but they now get a host of new abilities and stratagems to synergize with it. On top of that, they also got some buffs to their Archon, allowing him to join into Incubi units, making Archon-led Incubi a potentially absolutely lethal melee threat, especially when jumping out of transports from that Sky Splinter Assault, getting Lance and the ability to disembark and charge after a transport has moved. Combine that with cheaper transports and transports that now have some enhanced mechanics thanks to core rules changes, with hull measuring transports now able to disembark units 5 inches vertically in addition to 3 inches horizontally, giving them a lot more flexibility when actually measuring your disembark range from these things, plus the ability to disembark these units after they come out of strategic reserve or deep strike and then make use of their Sky Splinter Assault bonuses. Drukhari are looking like an absolutely transformed faction. I think they went from being one of the worst factions in the game to being a potential threat to top tier armies. They're able to take lots of efficient melee and shooting units, put them in transports, disembark them to get all of those bonuses, and then use all of the transport synergies that the Sky Splinter Assault has in order to support them. If you're a Drukhari player, I'm excited for you. This faction's looking super cool going into the new season. We'll have to see how things work out, but they can't possibly be worse than they were previously, and they still have access to all of their powerful units that they took in the previous season. Units like Ravagers and Scourges are still fine, and now you get a bunch of additional melee units and synergies to make use of in the new detachment. I'm so excited to see Drukhari on the table. I think this new detachment is awesome, and I would love to see more faction rewrites like this that totally redefine how an army plays if they're struggling. So with that, let me know down in the comment section if you have any other picks for factions that saw significant improvements that you thought I missed. Let me know as well how you feel about this data slate update and if you're excited to play with these new mechanics. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people help me keep the lights on over here, and I really appreciate you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.